Hi, I'm Dr. Antonio Graceffo coming to you from Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia, and welcome to China Economic Research. Today we're going to be talking about China's economic woes going into 2020. But before we do that, we have to address the coronavirus, which is the story that is just dominating all the media right now. We will be dedicating a full episode to the economic impact of the coronavirus tomorrow. Today, just a very quick rundown on what the coronavirus is doing economically. China has 16 borders, and at this point, all or most, if not all, of the borders are being closed. So most of the countries are not allowing goods and people to ship in and out of China. Many airlines around the world are beginning to halt flights, reduce their flights, maybe stop their flights altogether in and out of China, which means that cross-border trade is going to be on hold for a while. I have heard rumors that in China, what is a fact is that public gatherings have been canceled. I believe cinemas are closed now. They're closed here in Mongolia as well. Schools are closed. Universities are closed. I've heard rumors that even factories and workplaces may tell their employees to stay home. If not in the whole of China, then certainly in certain cities. So there should be an interruption then of supply chains and manufacturing and shipping. So this will affect China very directly, but then there should be an effect, a negative effect, unfortunately, to countries around the world that are counting on, for example, having their products manufactured in China and then shipped overseas. So there'll be an interruption of that. This virus coincides with the Lunar New Year holiday, which is generally the best time of year for tourism. And countries like Japan in particular, which normally receives a lot of Lunar New Year tourists from China, are taking a huge hit in their tourism industry because the Chinese are not arriving. And the thing about the Chinese as tourists is that they tend to spend a lot of money when they're traveling because they like to buy things. They do a lot of shopping. So in the United States, there are many retailers. It's very common that retailers make their entire profit during the Christmas season. And the rest of the year, they just sort of stay open, I guess, to you could say like a showroom to let people know I'm here and I'll be here for you at Christmas, but they actually make their money at Christmas. And so if you have a bad Christmas season, it affects their profit for the whole year. So the Lunar New Year over here is kind of the same thing. It's a lot of retailers and theme parks and things like that. They make most of their money during that week or 2 weeks or that 1 month of sort of Lunar New Year celebrations, and all of that's been canceled. So we can see that the retail sector, tourism sector, hotels, theme parks, cinemas, they're all going to take hits. Hollywood has become very dependent on releasing blockbusters in China, and of course the cinemas are closed, so that's going to hurt them. So China is definitely taking a huge hit from the coronavirus. Now, before this coronavirus outbreak, I was preparing my report on what happened in 2019 and leading into 2020, and we'll talk more about corona tomorrow. But what happened in 2019 was, first of all, the U.S. and China have had a trade war, or they're in the midst of a trade war. The trade war toward the end of the year began to negatively impact China's economy, and the government was downgrading their projections for the GDP growth of the country. China is famous for having very high GDP growth, 6.7, 6.8%, and they're also famous for the government predicting the exact number and being right every year, which is also a bit suspicious. But they've been downgrading the number. But there has always been a question among economists, what would happen if China's economic growth dropped below 6? Would this be traumatic for the economy? In order to stimulate growth or in order to stimulate the economy, the government has been not only spending money, not only borrowing money, but they've been encouraging, I'm looking for a word stronger than encouraging, forcing is almost the word I want to use, provincial and local governments to begin issuing bonds, to begin selling debt instruments to stimulate the economy. So China's debt to GDP ratio was already very high. And now they're asking the provincial governments to write bonds and, spend money basically. And they've actually ordered $400 billion of US denominated debt instruments to be sold. And the thing about that is that the RMB, the yuan, has been in decline. The value of the yuan to the dollar, the exchange rate of the yuan to the dollar has been in decline. And now they're issuing debt in US dollars that's going to have to be repaid in the future in US dollars. And so you not only have the problem that they're increasing their debt, they're also engaging in what we call a currency risk, which is basically they're borrowing in dollars, they're going to have to pay it back in yuan. We don't know what the value of the yuan is going to be at the time that they have to repay these debts. The central government is issuing bonds. It's done the largest, or is in the process of doing the largest bond issue they've ever done. And they're ordering, as I said, the provincial governments and the local governments to also issue bonds. China's debt to GDP ratio was more than 300% before. The other worrying indicator is in the state-owned banks, the non-performing loans. These are the loans that are either past due or they're in default. Payments are late. These non-performing loans are at a record high. Now, China also has different ways of categorizing non-performing loans. So there are loans on the books which, under a U.S. audit or under the definition applied in the United States, they would be considered non-performing loans. But China does not include those in their calculation of non-performing loans because they apply a different definition. So by international standards, the non-performing loans may actually be even higher than what China government is claiming, and what the China government is claiming is already the highest rate in decades. Meanwhile, there is political fallout as well, which is affecting the economy. So the Hong Kong protests are well known. The people in Hong Kong are demanding an improvement of their democratic rights. They feel that Beijing has reneged on several of the agreements that they had at the time of the handover. The people are demanding to have a real democracy where they could elect their own chief executive. Regardless of the political reasons and the right and the wrong of this, these protests have been going on since June. So we're looking at about 7 months of very large-scale protests, and it's caused a tremendous drop-off in tourism in Hong Kong, tremendous drop-off in just travel into Hong Kong in general. There were a lot of mainlanders that would go into Hong Kong to go shopping. They're not going there because a lot of them are actually afraid that they'll be targeted, as mainlanders. I would have to imagine that a lot of the inbound traffic that is not happening or that has been canceled, a lot of that is also by multinationals who are probably telling their people not to come in for meetings. I talked to a CEO that flew into Hong Kong for a meeting, and they basically had to stay in a resort. They couldn't leave. They couldn't go out, because it just wasn't safe or it wasn't possible because the roads were blocked. Retailers are closing, restaurants are closing. Anything that the protesters or the pro-democracy group have labeled as pro-Beijing, those businesses are no longer being patronized anyway. So those are closing. So Hong Kong's taking a huge hit. Now, toward the end of December, about the middle end of December, a GoFundMe page was started in the United States, which collected money to support the protesters. The money was transferred to an account in Hong Kong, and the government seized the money, or I believe froze the account, under allegations of money laundering. There was no indication that there had been money laundering. It was simply that this money had been raised on a GoFundMe page for the protesters. It was being sent to the protesters. I'm not sure what the organization was that was receiving the money, but either way, the government froze that bank account. Now, for me, this sends up an alarm because Hong Kong makes money. Hong Kong is able to function and to make money as a financial capital of the world because we trust Hong Kong, because we trust that they have the British law system, although it is a separately administered region of China, but we trust that they still have the British law, that we have contract enforcement, for example, because in mainland China, contracts aren't always enforced. In mainland China, foreign companies and local companies are treated differently when they go to court. But in Hong Kong, we tend to believe that we would have a fair rule of law, and they actually rank very high in terms of economic freedoms and rule of law, or did before the protest. The government freezing a bank account is very alarming, because this means that for political reasons, the CPP, the Communist Party of China, was able to invade a Hong Kong bank, freeze an account because they didn't like it. And that is very concerning. Will this cause Hong Kong's reliability to drop? Will this cause foreign institutions to no longer trust Hong Kong on the level that they have? Add to that then it's physically difficult right now to operate in Hong Kong, because you don't know when the protests will happen or where. The police are firing tear gas indiscriminately, and lots of innocent people are getting gassed, and people are getting sick from repeated exposure to tear gas, which is unbelievable, because when these things are rated as safe or acceptable under human rights laws, no one thought that people were going to